All right, we're recording, and I'm here with Eric Heuser. Um, how's it going, Eric?
Pretty good.
Good. So let's talk about, before we start talking about the piece you gave me. So I put a call out to the Slack group for stuff to do for the podcast, and you sent me two insanely good scenes that I really struggled to give notes to. Because they were really good. So, which I love, because I got to nitpick. I don't get to nitpick very often. It was really nice to get to nitpick. But I want to talk real quick about the history of the scene you sent me,
Yeah.
because we already did this scene in an episode. I mean, not this scene. We did a version of this scene in an episode, which was
Yeah.
episode 35 back in March. So anybody listening or watching this should stop and go watch 35 first, so you can marvel at the dramatic transformation Eric has made in these scenes. But yeah, so we did the episode in 35, and man, you've been working on this, because these are it's like night and day. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I told you after that episode that I was gonna scrap the part I did and redo it. And
Yeah,
that's what I did.
but it's still there. Like, you
See,
scrapped it, but I started reading it, and I was like, I've read this, but I was like, but I haven't read this. Yeah, it was really good. Nice work. Yeah, so how do you feel
yeah,
about,
it's completely different.
yeah,
No,
how
the
do you,
story base is the same, but
yeah,
it's different.
yeah, how do you feel about it now?
I like it a lot now. When
Okay.
I wrote it the first time, I was trying to put some ideas on paper,
Hmm.
but it wasn't. I didn't really like it. And after the coaching session we had, I understood a lot more about dialogue and how to communicate the emotions.
Awesome. Oh, either.
So yeah, I like it now.
Awesome. That's amazing. That makes me really happy, because that's what these coaching sessions are for you to
Yep.
walk away and be like, okay, I know what to do with this thing. Okay, so do we want to look at scene 1 or 2 first?
Scene 1.
Scene 1 first. Okay.
Yeah, it's going to put us in the context.
Yeah. Okay, so let me share my screen. That's the one I want. Okay, so scene 1, we've got you've got this opening between the man in the shadows and the writer. And it's this, I loved this so much, because one, you started off with a conversation, which is fantastic. But two, you give no context or scenery, but you still completely pulled me in, which was just great. And it builds this really awesome anticipation for the scene, because we have two, which I thought was really smart. You have two people talking about what the reader's about to read.
Yeah,
Yeah. Are you going to do this at the start of every chapter?
I'm trying to.
Oh yeah, please say you are, because it's
Yeah.
great. So I just want to, it's so good. I just want to look at it for a second. You've got this, are you sure you want to do this? Said the man in the shadows. I've already gone too far. I can't go back now. You're going to piss off a lot of dangerous people if you write this book, my boy. What's the expression? The truth will set you free. In this case, the truth will probably kill you. I know too much. I can't tolerate these lies. Right? So already I'm like, what lies? There's truth. There's a mystery. I'm here for it. Right? We're only 5 lines in. I'm totally in for it. So yeah, really great. I could just read this whole thing. I'm not going to do that though. Really great start.
Yeah, it took me a while to find the narrative drive.
Yeah.
How to do the narration for this. And
sorry, either you or I froze.
I didn't really have anything. And then one day I was thinking about it every day, and it just popped. I said, I'm going to go into the future once it's all done, and everybody knows or think they know what happened.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of lies that have been told.
I love it. It's a beautiful setup, because as the reader, it totally pulls me right in. I feel like I'm being let in on some kind of secret plot that's awesome, and I really want to know what's happening. has great anticipation. So I just had a few quick notes for it. The first thing, and this is at the top of both scenes. So you have the scene with the writer and the source, and then we get into this funeral scene that's driven mostly by Sylvia.
Exactly.
And in both the writer and the source and the funeral scene, you started off with just raw dialogue. Like, "Are you sure you want to do this?" said the man in the shadows. And then Sylvia's, you started off with, "Damn you, Richard, you had to be the hero, didn't you?" Sylvia thought, staring at her husband's casket as it was lowered to its resting place. So my recommendation, that like technique of starting with a voice can be really powerful if we want to catch the reader off guard, because it makes the reader go, right? Like, or who's talking? Who is that? It's kind of like, if you imagine this is a play, the curtain comes up and there's no one on stage, but a voice comes over the loudspeaker. That's the kind of like effect that this kind of opening has, which can be super powerful. For this instance, though, I think it might actually distract. So what I would do is I'd take this sentence, just this little phrase, the dialogue tag, and I just bump it up front. The man in the shadows said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And it gives us, like, the fog pulls back from the scene a little bit and we see a man standing there, and then we hear his voice. Same here, right? Like, staring at her husband's casket as it was slowly lowered into its resting place, Sylvia thought, "Damn you, Richard, you had to be the hero, didn't you?" Right? Like, again, like, let us imagine the casket, like, give us, like, let us see that we're at a funeral, see that Sylvia's sitting there, and then she's watching her husband's casket go down. What I love about that is your opening line at the same time. I think what a lot of us do as writers is we write a full paragraph to describe the scene. We're like, Sylvia watched the casket go down with all of her family standing around him. The giant men that were her husband's father and brothers were on all sides of her. Her chauffeur waited behind her. The grass was green and sad, and there was rain in the wind. And, like, we write this paragraph of like setting the scene. You really just, like, that sentence is so strong. That's really all you need, right? She watches her husband's casket was slowly lowered into its resting place. I'm right there, right? Like, I'm in the middle of it. And then she thought, "Damn you." So how do you feel about thoughts on those openings?
You froze up a little bit. Could you just
Oh, I'm
repeat that
sorry,
phrase?
my
Yeah.
internet. Yeah. How do you feel about the thoughts on those two openings?
Oh, I like it.
Okay.
Putting like the text in front.
Yeah.
Yeah, the tag first. I
Yeah.
really like it. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, the second thing with this writer opening that I wanted you to watch is you got some phrases in here that kind of are pulling back the gravitas of the moment. So, like, because this is like you almost get the feeling of like two guys meeting in a parking garage, right? Like, this is like a deep throat moment where, like, one guy's like standing in the shadows and the reporter's like, "Give me the dirt," like, so it's got that kind of like secretive, quiet tone, like quiet and serious tone to it.
Yeah.
So there's just a couple words you're using in here that I felt, and this is what I told you, Eric. The piece is so good. I'm like nitpicking words. There's a couple phrases in here that I would say, like, hey, these you could pull these and keep and like make it a little weightier, and it'll contrast well with the narrative action that they are about to describe. So, like, for example, here, I know too much. I can't tolerate all these lies. The truth must come out. To like, in that more like weighty, secretive conversation, we tend to say less.
Okay.
Right. So pulling out that last sentence, you don't really lose it. I know too much that I can't tolerate all these lies. Right. This is implied in the context, the truth must come out. You don't need it. Right. Like,
okay.
Or right here, he says, this is the shadow man. He says, "You're absolutely right. But in my case, it's something else." The writer looked at him in silence. Man, great dialogue response. I was the worst friend ever. I lied to him. I manipulated him. I betrayed him. God have mercy on my soul. So that opening phrase, I was the worst friend ever, has kind of like almost like a YA ring to it. So if we just change that out for like, I was a terrible friend, right? Like
Yeah.
a little bit more complex sentence structure, using the word terrible instead of worst ever, right?
Yeah.
Like gives it that more. So then it's like, I was a terrible friend. I lied to him. I manipulated him. I betrayed him. God have mercy on my soul, right? Like now we're getting that like more educated, a little bit stronger feel to it.
Yeah. That's where I want to go with this character.
Yeah, so really focusing on making his sentences, especially those like um firmer constructed, more educated sounding, right? Like instead of worst ever, terrible. Even down here, so the ending of this sentence was well, so yeah, so we'll back up to here. The ending was like, the writer says, what can you tell me then? And initially have him saying, I can tell you everything, but the first thing you need to know is that he was a hero. Where do we start? The best place would be at his father's funeral. His father? Yes, his father. Okay. So if we make this sentence structure a little bit more complex, we can get a little more kind of gravitas to the, like this holding back and jousting back and forth, the writer not wanting to scare him off, but the shadow man like kind of wanting to tell, but still not telling the story. So first we're going to take this like, the first thing you need to know is he was a hero, and we're going to put it down in here to where he actually starts revealing content. So now we're going to put all the content in one place, and it's going to feel more like a burst of like, okay, now I'm ready to tell the story. And then replacing that okay with I'm listening gives us that like a little more like educated weight to it. So when we make those changes, we get the what can you tell me then? I can tell you everything. Where do we start? The first thing you need to know is that he was a hero. The best place would be at his father's funeral. His father? Yes, his father. I'm listening. Right? Like, so now we get that. You see, you feel the like, okay, now I'm actually ready to tell the story.
Yeah.
Kind of all coming together.
Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, dude, this opening is fantastic. You would buy me in for like 5 chapters just with this opening. I'd be like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm reading this. Yeah. Anything else about the opening you wanted to talk about?
I wasn't sure how to separate the opening from the rest of the text. I'm going to have this at probably every chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
you got to have it in every chapter.
Yeah. So at first I was tempted to put it all in italics.
You're killing me. You're killing me.
No, I'm just joking.
Killing me.
No, I was just trying to find a way to separate it, to see that it's not the same people. We change timeline. We're not the same place. So I was wondering how to do it exactly.
So there's the question is like, how much do you want it to connect to the passage before? And by connect, I mean like, do they have to physically turn a page? Do you want it just like right in the next eye line? So like, I think the fast connect would be a little bit what you have here, which is just like 5 dots, 5 stars, and then you move down to the next paragraph. That's like, okay, I'm listening, and then I'm going to read the next line right away. Another way I've seen it done is that a prelude like this stands alone, and you read it, and then you get to the bottom of it, and then you have to turn the page to get the scene. That separates the two things. Because this is a shadow man kind of like telling a story, I would keep them closer together. Okay. I actually really liked what you did here with the like little 3 beats. If you don't like using the accented like stars there, you could just space down twice. Whatever is going to communicate to the reader that like, hey, this is a new scene. So like a double, And again, it depends on how you're formatting the book, but like a double space down, like a larger space down would do it. These dots do it, right? Like you could just put
Okay.
like a line in there with like, the space, the shift and the minus sign would give you like an underline that'll look like a line between the two texts. Yeah, I think any kind of physical separator like that, you don't,
Okay.
it's not like italics, right? Like the reason, since you brought up italics, one of the reasons I rail on italics is because when you move to an audiobook, the reader doesn't know, like the listener can't see those italics. But here, they're just going to do a long pause and the reader's going to like, change voices a little bit before they get here, right? Like, so you don't have to necessarily worry about this for audiobooks like you would italics or, yeah. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So let's get into the funeral scene, which is also fantastic. The first thing I want to talk about we talked about the opening. You're with both this scene and the next scene, you're dropping these exclamation points really early. What are you hoping to convey with the exclamation point?
When Sylvia is talking, I want her to seem desperate. She's living a lot of emotions, and a little bit further down is her breaking point.
Yeah.
And we're going to see it. You mentioned something a little bit later.
Yeah.
And this is the moment in her life where everything shifts.
Yeah.
It's a breaking point.
Yeah.
So I want her to be very emotional.
Okay.
I want the readers to see that she's not in a normal state of mind.
Gotcha. Okay. So I love the breaking point, and it comes down here on when she's sitting with the chauffeur is where I read the breaking point, where she's like, I'm out of here.
No, it's a little bit before that.
Oh yeah, when she yells at everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not internal. You were asking the question. It is external.
Okay. So let's tackle that in a second.
Okay.
So at the start, this is true of scene 2 as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. You got to give her somewhere to go.
Yeah.
So you got to start her softer. She can still be agitated and emotional and crazy, but giving her exclamation points in the first thing she says, we've got nowhere to go. She's already yelling, right? Like there's nowhere to ramp up to, and it's such an emotional moment. So right here, the first opening sentence that I love, staring at her husband's casket, it was slowly lowered into the resting place. Sylvia thought, damn you, Richard. I would put a period there. You didn't have, you had to be a hero, didn't you? I put a period there. So just the setting of the scene tells us that she's in a tough emotional place, right? Then you come in with this next line, which again, man, just a beautiful line. And I took out this because I liked it better without it, but it's totally just a style thing. So it's tears were rolling down and freezing on everyone's cheeks as the celebrant was finishing the ceremony. Sylvia wiped her eyes, trying to control her sobs. Right? Like, so now you're giving us her body language, letting us know that she's sobbing. So, and then here we get like 26 is too young to die. She thought it's way too young to be a widow. Again, like we've got the exclamation point. Yeah. It's just too early, right? Like we're not hitting it yet. I might give her, instead of this exclamation point, I might give her some more body language, right? Like she can clasp her hands until they hurt, or, she can wipe the snot from her nose, or like wipe her eyes again, question how much she's going to cry in one day, right? Like tell us that her eyes burn and it was becoming hard to keep them open because she's been crying so often. But like, instead of using that exclamation point, help us see her in this state, because it lets you build her voice to yelling.
Okay.
Yeah. And then if we slow, the same goes here for her father-in-law gets up and starts to talk. And he says, my son was an honorable man, a strong man, and he loved you all. We will miss him. He cleared his throat and paused. This is, by the way, this is amazing pacing. You nailed the pacing here in his speech, because it feels like he's giving a speech to a crowd, right? Like he's got these short sentences. My son was an honorable man, period. A strong man, period. And he loved you all, period. We will miss him. He clears his throat and pauses, right? I want you to remember the way he was, the happy, the mild, brave, and the world will not be the same now that he's gone, period. I pray for him and for all of us. He paused for a few seconds after inhaling a breath of cold air. So and he goes on talking more, but your speech here is just beautifully written. It's really nicely done.
Thank you.
The pauses are very realistic. The like, when we give a speech, especially when we're like talking loudly to a crowd, we tend to talk in shorter sentences because we're projecting. So it was done really well. The only thing I would add is you have a chorus scene here. So you've got the father-in-law, you've got Sylvia, and then you've got an unnamed number of people watching who are your chorus. And you've already brought the chorus in, right? Whether you knew it or not, up here, tears were rolling, tears were freezing on everyone's cheeks as the celebrant had finished the ceremony. So you've already told me there's a chorus of people here.
Yep.
Right. So here, when he's speaking, we need to hear from that chorus. We need to at least acknowledge that he's talking to this assembly that had gathered to pay their last respects, right? Like, so my son was an honorable man, a strong man, and he loved you all. We'll miss him. He cleared his throat and paused as, you know, the assembly nodded in agreement, right? I want you to remember him the way that he was: happy, determined, loyal, brave. The world will not be the same now that he's gone. I pray for him and all of us, right? Amen. Somebody called, right? Like,
Okay.
so get that chorus participating a little bit in this speech, even if they're just participating with their body language.
Okay,
Right?
that's what I was wondering how to do. But with
Yeah.
body language, yeah, I see it now.
But talk about them as a unit so that you don't waste a ton of time or words, because we want to stay present in his speech. So talk about them as a unit of people, right? Like, my son was, he cleared his throat and paused. Everyone nodded in agreement, right? Like, now, did everyone actually go? Like, no, but we get the image, right? That everybody's like, yeah, that's right. And then you can have like on occasion, you can have one of them say something, but keep them nameless, right? Like, yeah, that's right. We loved him too, somebody called, right? Like, he was the best, somebody called, right? Like, just throwing in like one-liners from nondescript people in the crowd will make this feel less like a monologue and more like a man having a conversation with a group of funeral goers, which is what you're going for here.
Yeah.
Again, your pacing is great. I wouldn't change a thing about how you wrote his voice. It's really good. I just throw that chorus into these pauses that you've already written in. Yeah, it's really great. So then we get this handful of men staying around, and we have she starts to like have, this is where she starts, this is where you want her to start to break, right?
Yep.
Okay. So we have, with that in mind, let's take a look at it. We have family, she whispered to herself, right? What else would you call a group of 7-foot-tall barbarians? She observed her husband's father, knowing his demeanor was about to change. First his brow went down, his lips parsed, and finally his nostrils flared. And there we go. The monster's out, she added as he started to speak. Is she thinking this or saying this?
No, she's thinking this. This is internal.
So we gotta make sure that we know that's internal.
Yeah.
You did it a good job here as she's whispering to herself.
Yeah.
Um, so I might like have her like, um, his nostrils flared, and then I might even like paste this down, like, and like, um, she groaned, or like her heart ached, and she screamed in her mind, right? Like, I'm not thrilled with the phrase in her mind, but something like that that lets us know
Yeah.
like
Yep.
this is internal. It's not
Yep.
coming out yet, but that she is like losing it internally a little bit. Um, we have this next piece here where he starts, um like saying he's gonna threaten the people that he's doing it. She's still whispering to herself, and then we have this guy Colin show up, and he picks him up and chokes him, which is a really dramatic scene.
Yep.
And then we have this conversation where people are begging him to put Colin down, which is great. The problem is we lose Colin. We don't know what's going on with Colin. So what's happened, if we want to think about the construction of the scene as a whole, what's happened is you've pulled one of the faceless people out of the crowd and you've made them now a character that we can see. So now you're having a conversation between the chorus, the father-in-law, Sylvia in her head, and now Colin is here too. So we're having a four-way conversation, which means Colin needs to keep coming back because we need to know what's happening as he's being strangled, right? So we've got this like, sir, we're just here to help. Tell me what's happening with Colin. Please, sir, let Colin go. Henry pleaded again. There was no response. We all saw the body, right? Like Henry's pleading. Richard was the best warrior ever. He shook his head and took a deep breath. What's happening with Colin, right? Like up here, Colin's being strangled and dying. If you tell us what's happening here, we're getting like 5 lines. Like, I got to check on Colin. Like, is he dead? Like, how long is this dude getting strangled, right? And then we get this next thing here of him like pleading to let Colin go. And then now I hear like at the side of Colin's purple face and bulging eyes, right? Like, so build up to that. Like, have Colin like trying to rip free of his grasp and he can't get free, and then have Colin like starting to like look to the sky, his eyes are rolling back in his head, but his feet are still like kicking a little bit, and then like right before he dies, the old man's gonna let him go. So adding in that like, hey, and what it's gonna do though is build the drama of the moment.
Yeah.
Right, like watching Colin struggle is gonna really pop that drama a lot. Again, though, the pleading by his friend Henry is perfect. And then when he drops Colin, this line, hitting his chest with his fist, he started to shout, "He was my son, my son." And then with a menacing finger pointing to his pupils, he added, "I'll be the one to avenge it." Like, yeah, this is where we want those exclamation points to start hitting.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Like, yeah, and this is fantastic kind of climax to this moment that then leads her into her wild kind of like response, right?
Yeah.
Like, and again, here you turned to question marks. This is where I want the exclamation points, right? Revenge, fighting over Richard's tomb. Do you scare it? Are you fucking kidding me? Richard is dead. He's fucking dead. And you want your boogeyman, right? Like, give me that like exclamation point in here, even though it's a question.
Okay.
To show me that she's screaming. She wailed, "You're crazy. You're fucking crazy." She stared at them one by one. Now here is where like now she's talking to the chorus.
Well, she was
Oh, sorry, I lost you there for a second.
talking, of course, from the beginning.
Yeah, she's talking to the chorus from the beginning, but we need the chorus's response.
Okay.
Right? Like it's a call and response, as if you were writing a 2-person conversation, writing a chorus. We need to know, like, how are they responding? Are they like nodding in they all nod in agreement? We are fucking crazy. Right? Like, or are they Or are they like cheering her on? Like, yeah, you got it, Sylvia, let it go. Or are they like shocked? I mean, you're going for shocked, but like, are they, are they shocked? Their mouths open,
Yeah.
mouths agape, looking around, looking at one another, unsure what to do, right? Like, and then if you give us the chorus's response, when she comes back here and says, if you keep following this man, pointing her trembling finger at her father-in-law, you'll all end up like him. Now pointing at the pit. I can't do this anymore, she screamed. I want out, right? Now, again, I need the crowd to respond. I need the chorus
Okay.
to respond again,
Yeah.
right? And then she can now she can have this moment where you're pulling her back. Goodbye, my love. I'll miss you so much. Wiping her eyes, she walked, right? Like, that's a beautiful moment if we get the crowd like lost in a response, unsure
Yeah.
what to say. It's really great. So I would say this whole funeral scene, pulling the exclamation points out at the beginning so that we have somewhere to go, making sure we always know in this section where Sylvia's internal and where she's external, and then making sure we're not losing the chorus and that we don't lose Colin. We gotta know. Does Colin come back?
Oh yeah, he comes back.
Okay, good. Poor Colin.
Yeah, he's a character actually I wanted to bring in the second book, but after doing all the prompts in
Yeah.
the Slack group, I
Oh,
brought
yeah.
Colin in, and he's just a character that I wanted to have a side character, but finally he's so funny.
Nice.
I just want to. I'm going to bring him in the middle section of the book.
Nice.
He just cracks me up.
I love it. That's great. Yeah, and you're strong on the prompts too, which I love. I love reading your responses to the prompts. They're so good. Yeah, I read the last half of this. I had no notes, man. It was great. I was into it. After this like moment in the car, so you pull them back. I'm just gonna read a little bit of it because it's so good. You pull them back here. She gets in the car, and you do have this line, I'm not safe, I need to hide, I'll go far away, well, no one will find me. You got to tell me that's in her head.
Yeah. Okay.
And mostly because the chauffeur asks her, so are we leaving now, miss? Sylvia looked back at the small group of men of the Lambert family monument, upon which the stone angel, brandishing a sword, seemed to be ready to strike them down. Great image. I wish, right? I think she's saying that out loud.
Yeah, that's out loud.
Yeah. She said
and we're not exactly sure if she wishes that she could leave right now.
Yeah.
Or if she wishes the angel
they would all die. Yeah, it's a great moment. Right? So she sits down, the warmth of the car soothing her numb body. I'm not safe. I need to hide. I'll go away, far away, where no one will find me. Because she just spoke to the chauffeur, this could be out loud or internal. I don't actually know. Okay. So like we need to recognize that like that's happening in her head. And then I was shocked when you got the father-in-law in the car. I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. And then you totally modulated his voice from the like raging quasi-lunatic with the crowd to like now he's suddenly sensitive. He's using it, still very much sounds like him, right? Like he still has these short sentences. He's still very like strong and directive, but he's using words like sweetheart, and he's like focusing on like caring for her. Yeah. It's a really nice transition. It gave me a picture of like this kind of big hulking guy and this tiny and like squeezed into this limo next to this woman, like just doing his absolute best to like figure out how to help her at this moment. Yeah. So anyway, it's a fantastic, I'll just read this section because it's so good. He says, turning on her street as if the old man had fixed himself a limit, he cleared his throat. I'm so sorry, honey. You were right. It wasn't the right place to do that. She remained silent. Do you want me to stay over? Nothing. Do you need anything, sweetheart? He asked again in a soft voice. Yes, she answered. tell me what, and I'll do it. You know, I would do anything for you. I love you as if you were my own daughter. Now, this is great because it's in that same cadence that he had up top, right? Like, so the cadence there is really nice. Sylvia squirmed slightly in her seat. I want to leave. He raised an eyebrow. Where do you want to go? France, Italy, money is no object. You know that, right? Like, so the transformation in his voice, the like change in topics where he's like focusing on her as opposed to like revenge. It's just a really nice transition. And it goes for another half page. It's so great. I was really I loved it, man. This is really nicely done.
Cool.
Okay, so you come back to the writer at the end. She was pregnant with David. And I would
I wasn't sure
ahead.
if I wanted to have something at the beginning and at the end of every scene.
Your scene is so strong. I wouldn't. Okay. Both scenes you sent me are so strong. So I assume every scene in the book is going to be that strong. I wouldn't. I would let the scene live and then bring them at the beginning of every chapter, because what that's going to do for the reader is give the reader this feeling of like we're starting a new part of the story. I think the interesting thing is going to be, inevitably, you're going to have some of these scenes that are really long. And so the question is, do you just have a really long chapter before you bring the writer back? Or do you have some chapters that start without the writer? The beautiful thing is that if you go to traditionally publish this, it's not actually going to be your choice. There's going to be an editor that has something to say about that. If you indie publish this, it's just art. Like you can decide which way you want to go. Part of me likes the like non-traditional chapter structure where you're just like gonna run a really long scene that is like 3 times longer than the other scenes, and then so the start of each chapter is the writer and the shadow man. But again, that's a conversation for later. But I would always have them only start chapters and not end chapters.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at scene 2. So anything else you wanted to talk about with scene 1 before I jump?
No, that's fine. Thanks.
Such a great scene, man. Such a great opening to a book. But so the last line you had in scene 2 was she pregnant with David? You can see that starting that right here, right? Like, was she pregnant with David? The writer asked. And now you don't need to put that dialogue tag up front because you've established in scene 1 that the shadow man and the writer are talking. So we don't need that dialogue tag at the front, right? Like, so was she pregnant with David? The writer asked. And then he can be like, that's right. And then you can have the writer saying like, okay, keep going. Right. Like, and then he can be like, there isn't much to say about the childhood, so I'll jump to 17. So yeah, so that kind of like pulling the last chapter into the first chapter connects these scenes. It's, you write like I do, which is a full scene at a time. I know that because I've seen your work in the Slack.
Yeah.
So there's a thing that we have to be really careful with, which is that in our books, every chapter ends up feeling like its own short story because it starts and ends, because that's how we wrote it.
Yeah.
And we have to make sure that they all feel continuous so that the reader doesn't put anything down. So that, like, making sure that like they bring the last scene into their conversation here. Like no time jumps for the writer and the shadow man. You can time jump all you want with Sylvia and David and all of your characters, but no time jumps with the writer and the shadow man. It has to feel like they're having a continuous conversation.
Yeah. The only time jump I want to do with them is at the end of each book, saying, okay.
Yeah.
I'm tired. We said enough for today.
Mm-hmm.
Let's continue tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good. And I love the idea that you're going to end it with "Let's continue tomorrow,"
Yep.
because it lets the reader know, like, okay, we're coming back.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
There's also a lot of potential here to play with who the Shadow Man is. I'm sure you're thinking about that already because you didn't give him a name.
No.
Yeah.
And that's on purpose.
Yeah.
He's a character we're going to see, and I don't want to reveal who it is until the end of the book.
Nice. Hopefully the writer too, right?
The writer too.
Yeah.
It's completely at the end of the series that
perfect.
we'll figure out who the Shadow Man is, who the writer is, and where they are in time.
Oh, I love it. That's great. Okay. So again, here we already talked about this, but again, so this conversation, this is the chapter you gave me back in March. And just to recap for a second, the chapter you gave me in March was hugely exposition heavy. It was like paragraph. He comes downstairs, he's thinking about things, he goes on a jog, he's thinking about things on his jog, and then he comes home and he finds his mother having this like medical fit. All of the content is the same, but it was very like silent and trudgy, right? And now this thing moves. I mean, it's so good. It's really emotional. You've got a really great emotional flow, although I think you come in too hard too fast. I'm going to slow you down a little bit.
Yep.
And then there's one place where you lose the thread, and you got to keep that, like, because this whole thing, the whole scene now is a fight between David and Sylvia, between son and mother. And the tension is high and then you kind of release the tension valve at the end, which is awesome. And because it ends in a kind of mother and son, like everything's going to be okay thing. It feels very much like a family fight. It was really, really well done. And again, you can see, like, man, once you start clicking into the dialogue, I have no notes because it's so good. But again, you're coming in hot with exclamation points right away, right? Not again, not now, David complained. Okay. Right? But we're going to read that as not again, not now, David complained. Where what you want is not again, not now. So like adding those periods there give us that sense of, like, because they're 2-word statements, we feel the like punch of them. You've got complained as a dialogue tag, so we know we can kind of hear the tone. Removing the exclamation point just brings the volume down a little bit and gives you somewhere to go. No arguing, young man still affirmed, mom, right? And again, you've got an exclamation point here. I might just do a period, but it's a one word, like, mom. So like you can kind of get away with an exclamation point there. Your call, total choice. How far can we go? You can, my decision is final, David. Using the name here is really nice because it emphasizes the fact that her decision is final, right? Like it says, like, this is like, so we use the name when you want to use someone's name in a verbal expression like that, when you're making a strong point, right? So here is a great place to use it. Down here later, you use it, and I wanted you to pull it because she's getting softer, right? Like, so here, we're further down in the piece now. If we move, we'll need to find a new oncologist with new identities. You know how hard it's going to be. You originally had he pleaded. Again, I didn't think you needed it because he is pleading, but that's I'm nitpicking. Like, it's great with it. I'm totally just like looking for something to cut. He pleaded it, and then you have like, I know David, but they can help me anyway, right? Like, so you heard how I popped his name when I know David, so like I know, but they can help me anyway. Has a more vulnerable feel to it. It's more open. It's less like making that point. So that's just something weirdly we do in English when we're using names, is names like pop this thing. They emphasize the moment, prove that we're making a point, that we're like calling you out. So up here, great use of a name. Down low when they're softer and he's like pleading and she's like thinking about her cancer, like no need to use the name there because we want her sounding vulnerable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. This was all great. I'm just going to read it because it's so good. So we did the how far can we go? You can barely walk. Far enough. It's never far enough, David said, raising his hands over his head. Really nice body language there in that dialogue tag, like telling us like the like exasperated feeling he's got going on.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. Now pack your stuff. We're leaving. No, Mom, I'm sorry, but you're too sick. Don't you put this on me. You think I haven't noticed? She said, putting her hand on her fragile hips. What? Now here's where you lose the thread. That silly grin on your face, you've had it since Tuesday. Now, I know because I've read forward that you're actually ramping her up here. She's getting angry.
Yeah, she is.
But the phrasing, that silly grin on your face, you've had it since Tuesday, with no body language around it, makes me think that she's actually easing down and teasing him.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to pull this out and change, just we can keep the same content, but change it to something like, did I write over here? Maybe I did. No, I wrote it down here. Yeah, so something like, don't put this one on me. You don't think I haven't noticed, she said, putting her friends on her fragile hips. What? You know, I know about the girl, right? Something that like makes that declaration, and then have him be like, you've been walking around here with that stupid grin on your face. Don't lie to me. Right. Like, but keeping the accusation, keeping the like tension in her voice. And he's just like, no. And he's not going to blush. Right. Like they're in the midst of an argument.
Yeah.
So he's going to look down. He's going to look away. Right. Like he's going to like lean on the table. He's going to grab his hair. Right. No. And then she can say like, again, like, you know, you've met a girl. I know. And then he can be like, no, maybe, but we don't want the no there because no, maybe again sounds like he's playing around. It's like, you've met a girl instead of haven't you? You've met a girl, I know. And then you can be like, fine, maybe. Right. Okay. So like having that moment of confession, and now we can ramp her in, right? Once she has the confession, then she's going to like go for the kill.
Yeah.
Because that's the Sylvia we saw from the first scene, is the Sylvia that's going for the kill. It's like, now you know the rules, she said, pointing a menacing finger at him. Right. But Mom, this is unfair, he protested. And you might want to give him some body language here. Rules are important. You know that, she said, ramming her fist on the kitchen counter. So like you can feel though, if we fix this so that it's not as like lighthearted and has some more weight to it, give her accusations, give her like forcing him. And then when he confesses, now she's ramming a fist on her counter, makes sense. And we can feel it like she's building. So as they start to yell here, it makes sense, right? Like, yes, I do. But David said with his nostrils flaring, no, but if they weren't important, they'd be called suggestions. Are they suggestions? She screeched. No. He yelped at her in a fury. Sylvia crossed her arms, waiting for him to apologize. David's face became crimson red. He sustained his mother's gaze with contempt. Yeah, Sylvia's rules, right? Like, so again, you've got a nice build here to him yelling at her, and then she's just going to stand there. And so, and then he starts to back down a little bit. So you've got really nice like peaks and valleys in the argument, which is what happens in an argument, right? Like people don't sustain yelling at each other for a long time. We don't sustain the heightened emotion for a long time. It's like two boxers dancing, right? Like we throw some punches and then we back up and we size each other up again. And you've got that nice flow here where you're opening almost in the middle of, like you're opening in the middle of the fight, but you're opening in the middle of them sizing each other up. And then she's going to take some swings here about him having a girlfriend. And he's going to swing back. And then when he swings back, she takes a step back to size him up again. And then he takes a step back, right? Like, so you can feel that like rise and fall that makes the argument feel very authentic. Because we don't just scream at each other forever, right? We
Yeah.
scream and then we cry, and we scream and then we walk away, and then somebody chases somebody down, and then they scream at each other again, and then somebody like whacks something with their hand, or like, you know, throws something, like however violent you want to ramp it up to. Or in a more civilized conversation like this one, he's going to scream, she's going to stand back and cross her arms, he's going to back down, and then she's going to go on the attack again, but he's going to stay back down because this is his mother, right? Like, he's not going to go violent with her. He's not going to like throw things. He's not a villain here. So we don't want him like being an aggressor with his mother, because it's hard to see an aggressive person with the mother and then like them all the time. But we come out, you've done a good job, because we come out of this really liking David, because he backs down to his mom, and we have this inherent thing built into us that like, you obey your mom. So he says, yes, Sylvia's rules. She says, what does that mean? She replied, surprised by her son's rebuttal. That means I'm tired of following your damn rules, he spat out. Watch your mouth, she growled with a menacing hand. So she's ramping back up, right? Like, because she didn't win, right? Like, she thought she won, she didn't win, so she's coming back at him. And that's what I mean by those like peaks and valleys of an argument. And you did a really, really great job with it. Yeah, it was really good. Then you come in here with this illustration of the OK Corral. Where were you going with this? What were you going for?
I was trying to show that this was a showdown between both of them. And I had this image of the OK Corral.
Yeah.
And the words I use after that, it's all words of showdown. You know, who will shoot first, pulling out the big guns, holstering his tongue, you know, so I wanted to make it really like a duel.
Nice. I like it. I like the imagery you're using. You might start it earlier, because the showdown really starts here.
Yeah.
Right? Like, they're already facing each other off. So if you want to bring it in early, you might say like, not now, not again. No arguing, young man, Sylvia affirmed. Mom, my decision is final, David. And now, like here, that's the first kind of like back and forth, right? Like the first like punches thrown. You can pause here and give the illustration of like, and they stared at each other like they were at the OK Corral, right? Like, move this line of time stood still. It was the OK Corral all over again without the tumbleweeds. I would just take that line and put that line up here. How far can we go? You can barely walk, David complained, right? Like, so they've sized each other up, and now they're coming back into the fight. And let it go again, like, you're going to pull this piece of the girlfriend so it keeps the argumentative tension. And then when we get here to, you know, the rules, but Mom, it's unfair rules, you know, you've got this, Sylvia crossed her arms and waited for him to apologize. This is another great moment to bring back this illustration you've written about the OK Corral. And just the sentence, right? Like, you know, Sylvia crossed her arms, waited for him to apologize, but, you know, like any gunslinger, ready to draw at a moment's notice, like ready to draw again at a moment's notice, or ready to start firing at a moment's notice, right? Like, yeah, so I would start it earlier and bring it in, because it felt like its insertion here at the top of page 2 made it feel like we're starting a new fight.
Okay.
Yeah. I love the illustration, and I think you're right. I think it's a great like showdown. Um, I love the illustration of just two white hats that don't see eye to eye. That's also really nice. Like, so I wouldn't lose any of it. I just space it out. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So she had some things here that I want you to put in her mouth, right? Like she couldn't believe her ears, her sweet boy. How could he be so disrespectful? He never defied her before. Where was this going? The problem with this sentence is that through this whole thing, it's not like chapter 1. We're not watching this from Sylvia's perspective,
No.
right? We're watching them as like a third party go at it, but suddenly you're in her head.
Yeah.
So we need to get out of her head. And like you need to put that in her mouth. And it's very much something a mother would say. You never used to talk to me this way. You never behave like this. Why are you doing this to me? Right? Because Sylvia talks a lot about me in scene 1, so we're gonna pull it back here. Why are you doing this to me? So that like that's something you could see her character saying, you can see her throwing in, and it keeps that dialogue going. It keeps us out of her head. Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Good.
yeah.
And I noticed that I didn't like it. I wasn't sure what to do with it. So
yeah,
now
and I can
yeah.
tell because it's the only time in the scene you do it.
Yeah.
So I read it, I was like, he just didn't know what to do with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And always put it in their mouth. If you don't know what to do with it, just have them say it out loud. And I find that if I just put it in quotes and then read it again, I can be like, oh yeah, that's how it works. But like, just like actually putting it in quotes so you can see it in their voice will help you figure out where to put it. Yeah.
Okay.
That's a cheap editing trick. Um, I loved this moment here where she tells him that she pulls back, right? So David's jaw was clenched so tight he could barely speak. Mom, I see you every day, getting weaker and weaker. And I'm scared. Okay. And then you had like, I know you are. I'm scared too. I want to sit in it. I want it like, we've made this emotional mess. Make us sit in the mess, right? His eyes, and so I just wrote these words in here just to like the feeling of sitting in it. Like his eyes begin to water, the tears. He wiped away the tears with his sleeve, right? Like so, just like make us sit there with him crying for a second. And again, 2 sentences will do it. It doesn't take a lot, right? But just make us like pause, and then bring her back. I know you are. I'm scared too. Right. Like, so giving us that like pause in that moment makes us come in. And again, like we've already had our climax of the fight. You had she roared, I pushed her down to she barked, but this is like we're turning. I know you want the turn to be here. Like the next paragraph is the turn, but you're already turning up here.
Yeah.
Because he makes this very vulnerable confession. So I would probably start to pull her back here, right? Like, because he has that confession, let her respond in kind instead of, I know you are, I'm scared too, she roared. I would have like, I know you are, I'm scared too, she said. And then give her something like, looking down at the counter, she took a deep breath and added, but don't ever raise your voice at me again. Right? Because she's not ready to like let the fight go.
No.
But start to pull her in some.
Oh.
And so then we can have this like David bit his lip and glanced away. She was the law and he knew it, right? Like, so now we're gonna have this moment of reflection where he thinks about her role and his role. So if we're pulling it back, when he gets sensitive here, it's got a nice even transition and doesn't feel so much like a jump. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the rest of it, I'm just picking at it because it's so good. We talked about the name there. So here, again, this is a heavy chapter. So no one's allowed to smile until the last line.
Okay.
right? So, because originally you had here, what if we moved but nearby? Thunder Bay is fairly large. This isn't Tilt Falls. The bigger the town, the bigger the risk, she rebutted. I know we would break all ties. I know we wouldn't break all ties, but at least we'd stay close to the hospital, he insisted. What's her name? She asked with a coy smile. Right? Like the smile's too much because they've been yelling and fighting, but the
Okay.
what's her name is brilliant because he pulls it right back to her. Who? Sylvia raised an eyebrow and tilted her head. Her name is Sylvia, he said, wanting to avoid this conversation. That doesn't quite land.
Yeah.
You might want to play with that line a little bit. I have no suggestions for you. I know what you're going for, where like he doesn't want to say, like he's kind of saying like there's no one, there's just you. But
Yeah.
yeah, but her name is Sylvia actually made me think like, ooh, that dude's messed up. He's dating somebody the same name as his mom. Oh,
Got mommy issues.
yeah. And that I didn't get, like then I read her line, which is that's sweet, but answer my question. And I was like, oh, okay, that's a joke. But any time in conversation where we make the reader go back and be like, oh, okay, I understand the line before now, we're
Yeah.
slowing down their energy. So, you know, I don't know what to put there, but
Okay.
yeah, something that keeps it moving. Because this is like the conversation's lighthearted enough compared to the argument that we don't need a joke, right? Like it's good. They're great, right? That's sweet, but answer my question. Mom, David, Christina. It's Christina, okay? The three names there is so great. They're like Mom, David, Christina. Anyway, really strong dialogue. I really loved it. And again, like all the way to the bottom, no notes, because it's so strong. Where he goes out for a run. And again, so we get to the end of it, and you had this like again, this conversation between the writer and the shadow man. This is the first of your next chapter, right? He really
Okay.
loved her mother, didn't he? They were everything to each other. And who's Christina? I'm getting to that. And then like continue on with the next conversation. But yeah, that's
Okay.
yeah. Anything else you want to talk about with it?
No, I was wondering a few places I want to put some emphasis on certain words and I put them in capital. Is that okay
Yeah, it
or
was working.
not?
It's
Yeah.
style. It's whatever works for you.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at least they're not in italics. No,
At least.
capital, yeah. Capitals, italics, however you want to do it. Whatever works, you just got to be consistent. And
Okay.
like, I thought your dialogue's so strong. I don't know that you need to emphasize any words. Like like this, for example, here, this mom that he says, I think 4 times. Like you don't need to, it's not in capital, but like that's a place where like your dialogue's so strong. I hear it emphasized. You don't need to put it in capitals, right? Like, it's a weird line that we walk as a writer where we're like, I think I've done enough, but have I done enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. It's like, I think I've done enough, but if I put this in capitals, is it better? And there comes a place where you're just like moving the paint around the page, right? Like it's already full of paint and you're just like pushing it around and you don't even know anymore if you're like making that tree look better or if it's just like a different weird shade of green. And that's like, this is so strong. I have a feeling you'll keep picking at it because, but at some point you're just going to have to call it.
Yeah.
And be like, it's good. It's like Da Vinci said, right? Art is never actually finished. It's only abandoned. And that's when you write great dialogue like this, that's what happens. You get to a place where you're like, I could keep moving this thing around, but at this point I just have to move on and go do the next scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, anything else you wanted to talk about?
No, listen, this was great. All these suggestions you give me, it helps me a lot.
Oh, I'm so glad. That makes me
Yeah.
really happy. And the piece is amazing.
You know, and what helps a lot also is everything we do, like in a Slack group, all these subjects you give us to write about, it just like opens my creativity.
Nice.
You know, you're pushing like the limits with emotions and different types, like the hazard character we had the other day.
Yeah. So
And yeah,
the prompt the other day was, yeah, write a hazard character that's going to force the character, your lead character who's like carrying the emotional weight, your vehicle character, write a voice that's so big, a hazard voice that forces your lead character to respond. Yeah.
yeah.
I love thinking about
And
scenes that way. It's fun.
yeah, well, it's great because it pushes me to be able to create more compelling characters in my
Oh,
book.
nice.
Yeah,
That's good.
I really love it.
Yeah. Well, your characters are really strong. And Sylvia is, how long does Sylvia last in the book?
6 chapters.
Okay. She's a really
Yeah,
good voice. It's going to be hard to lose her in the book.
yeah. And I decided my first feeling was that she was going to die from her cancer, you know,
Mhm.
and finally, no.
Okay.
I already wrote that. I'm at chapter 30 right now, scene
Nice.
30. And actually, she dies like a hero, protecting
Oh,
her
that's
son.
great. She
Yeah,
needs it. Yeah.
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 And that's going to be a scar for David,
Of course.
of
Yeah.
course.
Of course.
He's going to
Yeah.
be there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm pumped, man. Keep it coming. If you got another scene, shoot it to me because this is fun. All right. I'm going to stop the
Okay,
recording and we can chat a little bit more.
great.